of subsidizing everything couldn't. There's a military aspect. Post-Soviet period, we changed the way our Navy works. We concentrated all of our power in the supercarriers. We don't have a lot of destroyers anymore. We couldn't patrol the global oceans now, even if we wanted to. And part of it is demographic. After 75 years of industrialization and urbanization, the very population structure of the world changed. And in most of the world now, especially in the advanced world, there are more people in their 60s than their 50s, than their 40s, than their 30s, than their 20s, than their teens. And we now have such a top-heavy demographic that's full of people who produce, who are now on the verge of retirement, that there aren't enough people to sell to. The US market is really the only one of size that still has a lot of young people. All those millennials that we keep maligning, they've got something going for them that their cohorts around the world don't. They exist. And there's no longer sufficient consumption on a global basis to support the productive capacity that's out there. So approach this strategically and militarily, or approach it demographically and economically. It doesn't have much time left.
Right. So to restate that just a little bit, at the end of World War II, the most destructive war in human history, 50 million people died. The US was kind of the last man standing. And we filled that out by mirroring, in many countries, democratic capitalism, and elsewhere suppressing challenges to a democratic capitalist order. Democratic capitalism, more than most, is based on consumer-led growth. As the population ages, it consumes less. I see a paradox here in a sense. If we kept having children and kept growing the population, you get resource exhaustion. If we didn't have children, which we kind of didn't, we haven't kept up with a new young cohort to become consumers and fill out the tax base, we're also kind of doomed. Were the paradoxes always going to trip us up, or is there something else we might have done?
There are a lot of countries out there that have followed different demographic patterns. I mean, everybody has started living longer and everyone has had a lower birth rate, but there's a lot of variation within the themes. The Mexicans didn't start going through this transition until the 90s. The Germans started it before World War II. Some did it slow, some did it fast. I don't think there's much of a paradox here, because unless we did it as a planet all at the same rate, it's really hard to draw an ideological argument as to how we might have done it different or better.
Fair.
The problem is that once the birth rate started to drop, with like a half a dozen exceptions globally, none of them ever picked up. You urbanize, you have fewer kids. There are very few exceptions to that trend. The prominent one is in the United States, where we had the suburbs. Suburbs in the United States mean something different than suburbs in most other countries. In most other countries, the suburbs are slums. Here, single-family homes rule. And if you have a yard, you can have more kids. So there's a cultural and a geographic element here that I think a lot of the ideologies that debate the consumption issue miss. And that's one of the reasons why the United States is actually reasonably well positioned here. I mean, like I said, the millennials exist. There isn't the equivalent of the millennials in Britain or in Germany or in Italy or Korea or Japan or China. And for the next 40 years, that is going to make all the difference.
So in that sense, for Americans, who are probably most of the people watching this right now, you never had it so good is going to move to you never had it so good compared to everybody else.
Yes and no. I mean, we're not going to suffer nearly as much on the slide down as everyone else, because we're not dealing with the collapses in finance and consumption or military security that a lot of other places are. But at the same time, we're looking at, in the next few years, at the Chinese and the German systems dissolving as economic players. That means that if we want to have manufactured goods in North America, we have to build them here, which means we need to roughly double the size of the industrial plant. Will that be inflationary? Oh, yeah. But it will also be the greatest economic growth story in the history of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Record growth is not something that scares me.
I can't figure out if you're positive or negative. It's so great.
That's fair.
You can't either. We're already getting quite a few questions, and I'll turn to them in just a minute, but I want to turn to them by way of having you look at a few of the sectors, because your design of this book looks at various important